what he has seen with his own eyes 2 miles down under ice are hieroglyphs that archaeologists that he was in, that was the mission.
Antarctica is usually described as empty. But for decades, Linda Moulton Howe says another story has been moving beneath the surface, not through public reports, but through private interviews, military rumors, deathbed confessions, and witness accounts she collected over more than 25 years.
We know a lot about what is 2 miles and 3 miles down. It isn't being shared with the public, but our government and probably other governments know quite a bit.
According to Howe, those witnesses kept pointing to the same disturbing possibility. Something artificial may be buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice. They were not describing a strange cave or unusual rock formation. They spoke of angular structures, massive underground spaces, strange materials, restricted coordinates, military intervention, and operations kept separate from normal scientific work.
2 most significant have been U.S. Navy SEALs. I know their background, I've seen their documents, I know photos, I know places that they have been.
That is why the story remains controversial. If the accounts are wrong, they are only another layer in Antarctica's long history of mystery. But if even part of them is true, then the continent may be hiding evidence that would force historians, scientists, and governments to answer questions they have avoided for decades. And now, Howe says she is no longer willing to keep those testimonies buried. The Man on the Ridge. The story reportedly began with a Navy flight engineer. In 1982, he was on a routine supply flight from McMurdo Station to a remote research camp when a mechanical problem forced the aircraft to land early on an exposed ridge. The conditions were brutal. But while the others worked, the flight engineer noticed something in the distance. Across the ridge, shapes broke the horizon in a way that did not look natural. They were too straight, too symmetrical, too sharply angled. As he moved closer, he saw what looked like the top of a large structure, partly exposed where wind had stripped away the ice.
It was a no-fly zone.
It was a no-fly zone for that specific region around the pole. There was this giant indentation that looked like a hole in the ice that looked like a snow ramp that went down into it.
Before he could get closer, the crew was ordered to return to McMurdo immediately. When they landed, intelligence officers were allegedly waiting. The crew was separated, questioned, told their flight logs were classified, and made to sign new secrecy agreements. The instruction was simple. This never happened. The flight engineer contacted Howe in 1998, years after the incident. By then, he was retired and elderly. Howe says she interviewed him for hours, checked his service record, and verified details he gave her, including dates, coordinates, and the names of other crew members.
Brian, when did you get into the Navy and how did you get to Antarctica?
I enlisted in July of 1976. In order to go to Antarctica, you have to volunteer. It's not a duty station where you are ordered to go. I was able to get orders to Antarctica Development Squadron 6, which was referred to as VXE 6.
Still, one witness was not enough. So she kept the testimony, said nothing, and waited for another piece of the pattern. The pattern begins. Over the next 2 decades, Howe says similar stories reached her from different sources. Some witnesses were military personnel. Others were scientists, pilots, contractors, or people connected to Antarctic research. One geophysicist allegedly described ice-penetrating radar readings showing huge voids underground, not small pockets or ordinary cave systems, but massive regular spaces that looked too structured to be natural.
Modern whistleblowers still argue that there is more about Antarctica that is being covered up than we think.
When he raised concerns, he said the data was classified within hours and his team was reassigned. Another witness, a Navy construction battalion member, claimed he was sent to a classified excavation site far from any public research station. There was no normal scientific briefing. The task was simple: drill straight down. At the bottom, he said, were metallic-looking structures and smooth surfaces that seemed too deliberate to be geological.
The outside temperature was at least 40 degrees below zero. Once you stepped inside these structures, the temperature was an ambient 68 to 72 degrees.
His conclusion was immediate. Someone built this. Howe also heard from a pilot who described a no-fly zone missing from public charts, and from a scientist who claimed strange artifacts had been pulled from old ice cores, only for military personnel to confiscate them before any report could be published. None of these accounts proved the story alone, but together, Howe believed they formed something harder to dismiss: the NORAD officer's testimony. Then, in 2016, Howe received a message from someone she later called one of the most credible sources she had ever interviewed. He was allegedly a retired NORAD officer with classified clearance, and he claimed to have been involved in an Antarctic operation in the early 2000s. His identity remains protected, but Howe says his testimony changed the investigation because it connected years of scattered accounts into one larger story. He claimed that beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, roughly 2 miles down, there were multiple structures of artificial origin. According to him, they were older than the ice covering them, and dated back more than 12,000 years to a time before Antarctica became the frozen continent we know today. If true, that would place them before Sumer, before ancient Egypt, and before nearly every civilization traditionally recognized in early history. He also linked the story to Operation High Jump, the 1946 to 1947 U.S. Navy expedition led by Admiral Richard Byrd. Officially, it was about polar training, research, and establishing an American presence in Antarctica. But according to this source, seismic surveys had already detected deep anomalies that were never meant to be discussed publicly. He further claimed that the United States, Russia, and later China had carried out covert operations in Antarctica for decades. But the most unsettling part was not only what he claimed had been found, it was what he claimed had been removed: technology. And according to him, some of it still worked. What the contractor saw inside. One of the most disturbing accounts came from a military contractor who said he worked on a classified drilling operation in 2003. He agreed to speak with Howe because he was dying. He had terminal cancer and said he did not want to take the memory with him. His job had been connected to what he was told was a geological anomaly, but what he described did not sound like geology. He said he was lowered into an ice shaft on a platform. The descent was slow. Above him, daylight shrank until it disappeared. Around him were walls of blue-veined ice. For a long time, nothing changed. Then, more than a mile down, the ice ended. Not gradually, it simply stopped. The surface around him became smooth and almost metallic, catching his headlamp with a faint sheen. The air felt different. The sound changed. He described it like stepping from one space into another. At the bottom was a huge cavity. On the walls were markings, symbols, and geometric patterns no one on his team could identify. Then he saw what looked like a doorway set into the far wall, a constructed entrance. His team was not allowed to go further. That required a higher clearance level. But he said he watched other personnel in specialized equipment prepare to enter, moving calmly, as if they had done it before. He was sent back to the surface, paid a bonus, and made to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. For years, he said nothing. Then when he knew he was dying, he told Howe that people deserved to know something had been found down there. The scrubbed images and strange materials. After that, Howe says the accounts became harder to ignore. A satellite imagery analyst claimed certain Antarctic coordinates were blurred or erased before public release. Before processing, he said the images showed straight-edged shapes that looked engineered. A material scientist allegedly described recovered samples that matched nothing in known databases, with unusual strength, corrosion resistance, and manufacturing marks that seemed beyond current methods. Then came the logistics records, excavation tools, sealed containers, armed escorts, and shipments routed through defense channels instead of normal research oversight. Witnesses also reported strange electromagnetic interference near some sites. But the most serious claim was that some recovered artifacts were not just being studied. They were being reverse engineered. If true, that would mean whatever was found beneath Antarctica was not only ancient, it was useful.